Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm Donald Grodoff, family coach with FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com. In the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast series, I delve into the hidden characteristics of OCD, anxiety, and anxiety disorders, the things that most people don't see, that are behind closed doors and shut within the mind about anxiety. My goal with these podcasts is to bring about awareness of obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. Understand that I am not a doctor, therapist, or counselor, and the content, information, resources, and ideas that are talked about and brought up here in these podcasts are things that I have used, discovered, or have been recommended to me, and I always recommend to seek additional professional help in finding solutions for yourself. Thank you for listening and enjoy the podcast. This podcast was recorded August 2nd, 2019. This is podcast number 32, Homosexual OCD. Now, this podcast, I'm going to be discussing a topic that is uncomfortable for a lot of people. But it's also unknown by a lot of people. It's one of the lesser known OCDs out there. And what I'd like to do is read what I found as a kind of a definition of it. And to let you know where this information I'm talking about today came from, part of the excerpts of this podcast came from Dr. Stephen Phillipson, who is a licensed clinical psychologist and clinical director at the Center for Cognitive Behavioral Psychotherapy. And some of the excerpts came from intrusivethoughts.org, and their information about OCD and, of course, sexually orientated OCD. So let me read this definition to you. I'm going to just say HOCD is marked by excessive fear of becoming or being homosexual. The subjects often experience intrusive, unwanted mental images of homosexual behavior. The excessive, uncontrolled thoughts and doubts are very distressing and lead to compulsions in form of checking. So, and it also states what I have found is that it is estimated that 10% of people with OCD have this specific subset. So 10% of all OCD could have this HOCD. What it also talks about is that it isn't just restricted to heterosexuals, because the heterosexual will fantasize and have thoughts of being homosexual. But it also can affect homosexuals believing and fearing and having obsessive thoughts about being heterosexual. So it's not just one side or the other. It can affect people of all aspects of life. And here's a big point of what goes on for them is this belief that they're never going to get over it. They're never going to get the answer to it. You know, a person suffering with HOCD is desperately searching for a solid answer as to whether they're gay or not, or straight or not. A straight person wants to know if they're gay or straight, and a gay person wants to know if they're straight or gay. So some of the common symptoms of it is social avoidance, stop dating, nervous around other people, just uncomfortable around. Here are some of the sexual orientation obsessions of a sexual orientation OCD person. One is the fear that they're gay when you're actually straight, or vice versa. So in other words, they've had a long history of being gay, or they've had a long history of being heterosexual, even having good sexual experiences, but yet can believe that they still have the doubts, and that they really want to find the answer. Constantly questioning their own sexuality. They have fear of sending out signals that make them seem gay or straight, whatever the situation is, depending on their sexual preference. And number 4, you may not be able to ever know or get the answer. So they may never be able to find the answer to this problem. And that's a fear that they have, that they'll never get solid solution. One of the problems with OCD itself is the fact of needing reassurance, needing to know for sure that something's going to happen. Some of the common compulsions that are behaviors that sexual orientation OCD does. First, avoidance. Stop dating or attending events or going out into social settings. Checking, looking at someone or a picture of someone of the same sex and determining whether they have sexual or emotional response. So really looking at pictures going, I looked at a butt, and this is something I've had a client, I looked at a butt, so I must be attracted to them and I want sex with them, and doing that, letting that just really blow up in their minds. Questioning is another one. Being confused when they see someone of the same sex and thinking they're attracted to them. So they're always questioning, oh, that person that just passed me by, was I attracted to him? Reassurance, looking at photos of the opposite sex to confirm that their sexual desires are aligned with what you know to be true, or what they know to be true. So it's looking at other people and then comparing, is that what my behavior is like? Because that person acted gay, does that mean is that my behavior? Some of the common misconceptions of it. OCD only comes in one general type. Subsets like sexual orientation OCD don't really exist. These are misconceptions, of course. People who are straight don't think people of the same sex are attractive. And I find that really fascinating about this. I talked with someone that was familiar with this, and anybody, we can be attracted to other people, even the same sex people. It doesn't. What I think we as a society tend to make even the word attraction be more sexually orientated, and it's not really true. I teach in the work I do is I teach about the law of attraction. And it's not about sexual orientation. It's not about sexual attraction, even though that can be part of it. But we are attracted to other people by their energy. A good friend of the same sex you can be attracted to them for their energy as a fun person, as an energetic person, as a person that's just feels good to be around. And they can even look attractive to you. I guess as myself, I've seen other men and go, I can imagine that they're really attractive to women. And I never really found them attractive to myself, but looked at them going, oh, they're a handsome person. And I bet they're a female attractor, or, so attraction, I think this is one part that I think it's important for a person suffering with this OCD is to realize that attraction isn't what they're defining it as. That attraction is an energy. That's really, even in a sexual attraction, is important to realize that attraction is really about what that energy is. And we're attracted to that energy. It's like energy meets like energy, and that's we like that as a human being. So attraction is not really defined well, I think, for an OCD person, and we need to kind of work on that. people who are obsessively worried about being gay must actually be homophobic. Or in other words, they must really be gay, and they just don't really want to accept it or be it, and that's not true. Um, so, how do you know it's? Let's see. How do you know it's OCD? Um, Everyone gets intrusive thoughts, but having them doesn't mean you have OCD. For people who have OCD, these thoughts can be debilitating, causing extreme anxiety and discomfort, no matter how hard you try to get rid of them. And this is something that I've talk about in other podcasts, is about what OCD really is. It's possible for sexual orientation OCD and relationship OCD to be intertwined. Sexual orientation OCD obsessions can transfer into concerns about a person's partner and overall relationship. So I think what I would see, and I probably need to look the difference up because I hadn't read this part of it, because it was really talking about how to or what it's like to be OCD, which I've talked about over and over. So I glanced over this and I just missed the relationship OCD, so I'll have to look that up and kind of get an idea of what that is. I can kind of guess that, sexual orientation OCD is more of a concern about the being gay, being straight, having sexual thoughts and about somebody, whereas a relationship OCD would be more of an obsession over having the perfect relationship. Am I in the right? Am I able to handle a relationship? Am I good at it? Is this a real relationship or is it not? All around that kind of obsession. But that's something I'll have to look up, and I may have to do another podcast on. So some everyday examples. Again, I'm kind of reading some of these off of this page that I found. But here's some everyday examples to help you kind of know if this is what's going on for you or for another person. You're a straight man sitting next to another male on the subway. You instantly begin worrying that you've become aroused if his leg accidentally brushes yours. And there's an interesting thing about this, because in thinking about, your leg bumping another person's leg, and I don't have this HOCD, but I can think back and being in a crowd or being in somewhere, and my leg actually bumped against another man's leg, and a brief second there was this, oh, that's weird, and was there something about that? I remember that I don't know, just now as I'm saying this, I brought this up in my mind, that kind of went through my mind, and then it was gone. There was no obsessing over it. It was just this weird, really thought, like, that was really weird that I touched his leg like that with mine. And is there something about that? And then I probably got distracted by a phone call or something, but I'd never obsessed over it, never worried about it, and still don't. I mean, it wasn't anything, but I can remember that. So it tells me that anybody can have these, sexual thoughts. It's just when you obsess and take it to the extreme like this that it becomes OCD. Another example, you're a straight woman who's never had a sexual encounter with another woman, yet you can't stop having graphic fantasies about one of your female coworkers. Number 3, you identify as gay and have for many years. Sometimes you find yourself looking at someone of the opposite sex and obsessively wondering what it would be like to be with them. So here's another part of it that I've kind of learned about this and working with it and doing some research on it, because I'm actually working with a client right now that that this is what we're dealing with. And it talks about what when research talks about the fact of history doesn't isn't allowed and is pushed down by OCD. So in other words, a lot of people that have this, may have been triggered later in life when, like, even past 11 or 12, when the sexual hormones kind of kick in, is when, a lot of time. And before that time, and this is usually dealing with older people, of course, probably, they've had good sexual relationships, or they've had good thoughts and solid thoughts about their being straight or being gay, either one. But in their history, they've shown a solid belief in themselves being whatever they are. But OCD kind of like wants to shut that off and not remember that, hey, I've been straight all my life, and now these thoughts, that, it doesn't allow history to weigh in on that. And it really needs to, because, what I saw in the research was that people suffering from this, a lot of times, I don't know if they use majority of the time, had a very strong background in what they truly were. Well, if they were a straight person, they had a very strong history of being straight and, down that path. So that's why these thoughts really are just thoughts. So anyway, so history kind of plays into that. Um, so here it talks about how my family, or probably, family, friends, and things like that, can play into this, or not play in. I'm sorry, that's not the right words. How they can help in this, because you don't want to play into it. You don't want to feed the OCD. So it's important that your partners, family members, and friends know that you are not having a sexual orientation crisis, and that your thoughts are not authentic. So they may be concerned with the possibility that their sexual orientation is different than what you know it to be. So in other words, it's kind of letting them know that what I'm going through is thought-based. It is not an actual experience. That because I'm having these doesn't mean I'm really wanting to change my sexual orientation, or want to be different with that. It says, however, these obsessive thoughts are the issue, not your sexual orientation. So it's the thoughts, not the orientation, or what the past has shown for you. So reassurance is tempting, but it can actually make your OCD worse, of course. Involving your family in therapy can be a good way to help them understand the do's and don'ts of the disorder. And of course, it makes the case that, is recovery possible with this? And the answer is definitely yes. Again, recommending here the ERP as one of the best methods for treating it. So, and it's exposure. It's, they talk about carrying around a photo of an attractive person and looking at it and letting yourself sit through the thoughts with it until they dissipate. So there's a couple different ways. So it is treatable. And again, I don't think, as any OCD, that it's really curable, but it is treatable. So the last thing that I wanted to just kind of go over, I found, and I'll give you the reference to this. This comes from Dr. Jan Weiner, a clinical psychologist based in New York. And her website is www.drjanweiner, so Dr. Jan Weiner, DrJanWeiner.com. So she gives the 12 signs that you might have this HOCD. So, and she talks about, of course, HOCD is a subset of OCD. So let me just go through this list for you that might help you identify if this is truly the HOCD. Number one, do you constantly worry or fear an unwanted change in your sexual orientation? For instance, fearing that you will become gay when you are straight, or vice versa. Number two, do you worry that you are attracted to members of the same sex, such as strangers, friends, or celebrities, when you are currently identified as a heterosexual, and of course vice versa? Number three, do you worry that you are not attracted to members of the opposite sex, if you're straight, and of course vice versa with that too? Number four, do you worry that others may think you are the opposite sexual orientation from which you identify? For example, a straight man thinking, if my legs are crossed, do my guy friends think I'm gay? Number five, have you ever checked your genitals for arousal after seeing someone of the same sex, and vice versa for those identifying as homosexual? For example, after viewing an arousing scene on TV, you worry that you were aroused by a character of the same sex even though you identify as straight. Or, again, vice versa. 6. Have you looked at same-sex pornography and worried that if you were aroused? Or have you viewed opposite-sex pornography and worried that you were not attracted or aroused enough? Number 7. Do you avoid watching TV or movies that contain homosexual characters? And of course, vice versa. 8. Do you worry that you have hidden same-sex desires that you haven't acted upon yet? And, of course, vice versa. Number 9. Do you search the internet for answers about your sexuality? For example, Googling, how do I know if I'm gay? Have you read sexual blogs online to find evidence of whether you may be gay? Or you may not. Number 10, do you avoid sexual encounters because you worry that you may have a thought about a member of the same sex? And, of course, vice versa. 11, do you avoid sexual encounters out of a fear that you won't be able to perform? For example, worrying that if you can't get aroused by a woman that it might be evidence that you are gay. And finally, number 12, have you asked others for reassurance about your sexuality? For instance, constantly asking your friends if they think you're gay or you're straight. So those are just some things to think about in this process, whether it's for yourself or someone else. Is this an OCD issue, or is there something else going on? So I hope that this has enlightened you to this form of OCD, like I said, which is a less hidden version. And I'm hoping now that I've come up with this relationship OCD to look that up and do future podcasts on that, because there's some tie here, I think, to that. So I hope this has helped you, and I'm going to leave it at that. You take care. This concludes this podcast. We really would appreciate your comments. Simply leave a comment at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. There, you're able to submit a comment that will help us determine future podcasts. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, please email don@invisiblewheelchair.com. Remember, there is a corresponding tapping recording for each of the podcasts, with the exception of the interview podcast. You can find these tapping recordings and archive past podcasts at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Finally, there is relief for OCD. and we at FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com can help you find that relief. Again, you can contact us through those sites, FamilyOCD.com or FocusedHealthyFamily.com. You can also find us on Facebook at Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at InvisibleWheel1, that's the number 1, or at FamilyOCD. So thank you for listening. Keep tapping and transcending your life to new heights.